Hello and welcome to Last Week on the podcast, where we take our favorite TV shows, movies, everything at this point, and we go back through them. My name is Adam Straughan, and today I am joined again on this incredible journey through The Last of Us. I'm joined by Mr. Joey Dean. How are you doing, Joey?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful 60-degree February day in New York, so I'm feeling charged, energized, and ready to talk about infected fungus people.
Yes, I mean, it's so warm today, and I love that we're both wearing black t-shirts as well, which is totally unplanned. But
Oh, weird.
yeah,
Great.
isn't that strange? But yeah, super warm, bizarre, but a beautiful day outside. And yeah, what a nice weather to jump in and talk about The Last of Us and episode 2, Infected. So I love this episode. This for me is when the game really came forward, and especially with the fact that it's directed by Neil Druckmann. There's so many kind of moments that's lifted from the game in this episode. This is the Tess episode, which is just, we're all about Tess. We identified that obviously in episode 1, and I love this episode. What's your kind of general thoughts on it going into it, Joey?
I liked the momentum shift. Episode 1, it was a lot of exposition, and though we're still exploring exposition, I felt like this is where we really picked up the momentum of the show. Just like in the game, when you get to this part of the storyline, things start to move faster, smoother, and I also felt like they integrated the subtleties that would often be experienced as gamers into the show and throughout the show. It did feel like I was watching the cutscenes of the game in this episode. Episode 1, there was a lot of new stuff, new storyline, new back end things to talk about what happened leading up to the opening of the game. And I felt like after the intro here, it really felt pretty consistent with the game, and I liked it. And it felt it triggered my memory.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. Like, this is the episode that really pulled me back into the game. And there's so many different themes and elements, themes of like hope and everything like that, which we'll obviously discuss as we go through. But yeah, it's incredible. It's like a real introduction to a different type of infection, a different type of danger. You see characters like Tess has a little mini arc in this episode, which is brilliant. And we'll go into all of this as well. But I just love the natural progression, as you said, from the episode 1, where it's like everything's happening, everything's chaos, and we kind of get an introduction again, but it's like a softer chaos of like the impending doom, and then we're kind of there, and I love that. There are callbacks, reflections back to episode 1, so this is brilliant. Let's dive straight in. Okay, so this is The Last of Us, episode 2, Infected. As I said, directed by Neil Druckmann, who is the creative director of the video game The Last of Us, and the opening. All right, we are in Indonesia. We're in Jakarta. Now, I love this opening again because it's kind of similar to the opening to episode 1, where it's a cold opening, right? We're in Jakarta, we're in Indonesia, we're out of America this time, and then we just see this woman sitting in a cafe. And then I love this shot of how, it's very populated, it's very pedestrian. There's a lot of people around, people are eating, doing the normal things. And this is such a callback that we get later on in the episode when we see a restaurant kind of in present day of this world. But yeah, and then obviously the officer comes in. We see an officer come in, stands at the table in front of this woman, who we find out is Dr. Ratner, who is a mycologist. So she's a professor, and that is the study of fungi. Now, she's approached by this military person. It's in the car with them, like off they go. And like straight away, it's, oh, I apologize about your lunch. And, they're kind of just talking like, she's saying, oh, have you got the right person? And he's like, well, you're the professor of mycology. Like, yeah. Yeah. What's your kind of general thoughts of this kind of cold opening, Joey?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind, which I didn't really look into, is just what is the relevance of Jakarta? Is there any geographical significance of Jakarta? Obviously, this pulls us back to episode 1, in which it's being talked about on the radio, and it was a comical moment in which we learn that Tommy and Joel don't know where Jakarta is. I can't blame them. I didn't know where Jakarta was, but, Sarah comes to the rescue.
Yep.
So obviously it's harkening back to that moment. I didn't really know if there was any other signification to the geography, the space, the location, other than revealing that this is something that's happening throughout the world.
Yeah.
And obviously there's more context brought into the origin of how this could have started in this segment, but geographically, I didn't know if there was any signification, and that left me a little confuzzled. I also, right off the bat, second watch through, noted September 24th, 2003. Episode 1 was 2003, correct?
Yes.
So we're in September. We have 4 months of 2003 left. It is happening and it's happening fast. And that's
Hmm.
the biggest impact I got. Love what you said about the correlative to the restaurant, which comes back later on because that did feel like a very intentional shot, though quick. And overall, I enjoy these backstory explorations. It's interesting, it's different. One of the things I wrote down was that this actress had a very short yet powerful role. I thought this was really moving, really impactful, though different and short.
With the time that she has on screen and like even some of the physical acting that she does, which I'll talk about at a certain point later on, which I think is incredible. Yeah, she really kind of goes through all of the walks of almost denial. When she's kind of talking about like this, like, what, like when she even finds out cordyceps, like when she goes into the laboratory and, it's like a kind of like a disease control center, I guess. And the kind of like, she goes in and the cordyceps is like underneath like the microscope. And like the first thing when she looks is she says like, why did you use chlorazole for the slide? And like just looking into chlorazole, so that's obviously what they use as like a stain to identify fungal elements on humans, like underneath fingernails and like on hair and things like that. And straight away she like says like, like cordyceps can't survive in like humans. Why are you doing this? And that's her denial. Like that, well, this doesn't make sense. And then that cut from that to the soldier's face, when you just see the dread on his face, I think that's the moment when she's like, I'm intrigued, like what is actually going on here? And it's interesting with that performance, as that goes on, she starts to realize, and the dread kind of infiltrates her as well, especially in the last scene with her as well, which is like heartbreaking in many ways. But yeah, I loved as well, like the moment when she goes inside the lab, we have the body kind of lying on the slab. And then like when she goes up and sees like the bite mark, and like cuts and you see like something underneath the skin, you're like, whoa. And even her face, she's like, that doesn't look normal. And then that moment when she opens the mouth and like sticks the scissors inside and like pulls out the tentacles, I mean, that's pure horror. I mean, that was just, it's like body horror, but as well, it's the realization of how when she drops the scissors, it's like, shit, this is real, right?
Absolutely. I don't know how this cordyceps, the parasitic cordyceps, Ophiocordyceps, I think that's what it was called,
Mm-hmm.
that typically exists in ants, zombifying them. Obviously, this mycologist would understand
Yeah.
that how that behaves. So she walks into the situation confused, but as soon as she starts cutting into the body, there's this muscle memory that comes out, the scientific muscle memory, in which
Mm.
she's simply behaving as a scientist. She gets in her zone, she cuts open the bite mark, and I'm imagining what she sees beneath it is fungus. And
Yeah.
so the disbelief that this could happen, even though I'm sure she's seen the familiarity of this in subjects that she's studied, ants. I don't know if there's any other creature that this can happen in. However, I've only seen that it can happen in ants, as the beginning of for episode 1 explored. And she reaches into the mouth as soon as she pulls out the fungus and she sees that it is essentially alive. Her reaction, this expert, it really jars the audience because she's so together and calm leading up to this point. And as soon as she sees that, and then as the camera focuses on the person's mouth and they start to kind of crawl out and just do their little dance, make a little Afghan night, it's really eerie.
Mm.
And we're still exploring the extent of this infection. So for us as a viewer audience, it's unfolding more. It's becoming more three-dimensional, but we are attaching a lot of ourselves to her reaction as the expert. And so it makes it even scarier to feel that.
The shift from that to, just the moment of stillness from her in the next scene when she's just sitting down on the chair. And like interesting, the color as well, like the color scheme of this scene as well is very like it's very similar to the opening of the last episode we had as well. Kind of the same kind of color palette as well of them sitting on the, on the stage talking to us like experts. And again, one of them was in denial, saying like, oh well, cordyceps can't do this in the human body. And it's just interesting how we have that similar color palette that ties us back to that. But I love that, she's sitting down, the officer hands her a cup of tea, or what looks like tea anyway. And then, she's all the way through this, she's doing the maths in her head, right? Like every time he gives her information, she's adding things up and she's like, we're doomed. Like, we are fucked, like, literally. And you can see it on her face. And like, you know, when she says, oh, where did this happen? And it's like, oh, in a flour and grain factory in the city. There's so much that ties us back to episode 1 when we think flour and grain, that's where it started. The biscuits Adler neighbors had that were being pushed into the granny's mouth. The fact that there was no pancake mix when Sarah was going to make pancakes for Joel in the morning. You know, Joel didn't have a birthday cake. He forgot to get a cake. Like, you know, there's all of this. Sarah doesn't have any of the cookies that was made by the Adlers because they were, you know, raisin, they weren't chocolate chip. All of these moments start to fall into place. And I love as well when, you know, she says, oh, how many people, the factory workers, can you not find? It's, what is it, like 14 or something like that, he says. And the moment when her tea, she just rattles the tea, like, and has to put it down. It's like, that's the fear of God inside of her, because she knows. And that little moment of physical acting from her, just that rattling of the tea, so much so that she has to put it down. It's fear. It's that, oh my God, that dread. I mean, just brilliant, right?
I thought it was most interesting that she asks who bit her. The soldier says, we don't know, and then says that person's still out there. When in reality, this is unfolding that it is very possible that it is the grain, the flour itself that caused the infection, which is way scarier than the idea of one person loose that could bite someone. And
Yeah.
I think the focus on that we don't know who caused the initial bite or the initial symptom is the scariest bit. And I think she even might be navigating that in her mind and really weighing the options of what caused this, and the attachment to there's someone out there might even be her in denial, trying to convince herself that this was caused by another person, because if it is true it was caused by something in the food or something that was contaminated outside of another person, this could be what much wider scale than what she's thinking. And we learn that that's what the case is.
This is the point when she's asked these questions, she's done that you know, the maths in her head, she knows now it's too late. And you know, he even says to her, look, like, we got you in because you can help. Like, is there like a vaccine? Is there something like medicine? And she's like, there's no medicine for this, there's no vaccine, like, we are doomed. Just that way she delivers the word bomb, like, bomb the city. It's that dread, like, that's it, this is it, there's no way out of this, game over, man, game over. And then I love, like, that close up on her face when all she says is, look, can you take me home, please? I want to be with my family. Because those last moments, that's where she wants to spend the last part of her life. And just that dread, you know, that little journey we went on with this character we've just met, this expert who went from this denial, disbelief, to sudden shock, to, oh my God, what are we going to do, to just acceptance. It was just a brilliant crafted little arc for this character we only meet the one time.
I wonder if she might come back up. Obviously, she's new to the storyline.
Yeah.
We don't know her in the game. But we do know that we learn that Ellie is being transported to a facility that has doctors. And I wonder if there's a relationship between one of the doctors there, possibly a mycologist, who knows her. And this is why there's a focus on this character in episode 2. I thought of that when rewatching. I don't know if that's the case. It's not something explored in the game, so it's a speculative. But it could be that she might come back up in a flashback again. Who knows? I very much enjoyed her. I thought she was fantastic. And the juxtaposition, again, if we look at episode 1, there was such a mirroring between the opening half and the second half of the episode, just as you brought up already, that we're in a restaurant and then there's a restaurant scene in the second half of this episode. There is a parallel. I like how this ends with the conclusion that there is no medicine, there is no vaccine. This is an expert talking about this fungus. And then it picks up within the idea that they are in pursuit of a vaccine. And it creates this edge of your seat moment for the audience throughout the show, because what's going to happen? Are they going to even get there? If they do, is this even going to matter? Is this going to be worth it? Is a vaccine real? Is this possible? Because an expert, the expert, is saying it's not. I loved that she said, I would like to meet my family. I thought that was such a powerful, powerful line. Obviously, we see that this is September 24th, and she's right. It happens quick. It happens fast. And that really allows it to settle, to say this is this is real, and she knows it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have to say as well, to tie to current day, is that I love all of the memes that are coming out now online. You've probably seen some of them, Joy, where people are saying like, "Oh my God, all of this happened in 2003, so then they never got to do this, or this never happened." And one of them, the most recent one, was they never got to see like Star Wars, like Revenge of the Sith and stuff like that. Dumb memes, but I'm love it. I'm here for it, and it's nostalgia, so I'm right there with it. Um, yeah, so then we kind of leave that, and then we cut more to back up to like where we're up to in our current day, like with Ellie. She's sleeping. This shot, I mean, it's just dripping with like metaphor, right? Like Ellie in the fetal position, lying on the grass. We see a butterfly fly over her. There's metamorphosis tying in there as well, but also like that theme of the butterfly is tying together Sarah and Ellie again, right? We saw Sarah like in her own house, the butterfly in the window, sleeping on the butterfly. We see Ellie looking out of a window. There's a butterfly hanging up. And again, we see this butterfly. And this is an ongoing motif all the way through the show. And I really, really do like that. And just that imagery, that shot there, just that birth of something new. Like Ellie is like lying on top of this infection, but she's not infected. The imagery there is something, it's just so powerful, that one shot.
Yeah, and the idea of what stage of the metamorphosis are we in? Is she in the
Yeah.
fetal position because she's cocooned at the moment? Is she in the middle of the transformation, or is she actually in the very beginning of the transformation? Is she still a larvae? Is she still a caterpillar? We don't know, to the extent of which this metaphor of the butterfly will show, but we do know it's a consistency, it's a through line. I think it's a powerful one, and simply from a visual standpoint, and to go back to some ideas we talked about in the first episode of the podcast, the juxtaposition between nature and structure, architecture, human spaces devoid of life that are currently being inhabited by natural phenomenon. In this episode, we explore the extent of that, in which the fungus can occupy a space or a building outside of the human body, of course. And we also see in this opening shot the extent of which nature itself is billowing into broken buildings. I love this pockmarked facade, this holes that are drilled into buildings from warfare, bombs, time, and life still finding a way to seep through the cracks. I think it's such a beautiful imagery. I love the aerial view of Ellie. I think it's so poetic. It's so beautiful. The fetal position, awesome point there. It's such a pretty shot. Her looking up and then seeing all that, and then cutting straight to Joel and this kind of almost humorous seriousness that takes you out of this dreamlike state.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the comedy in that moment there, just cutting to them and, stone-faced, staring at her, kind of waiting for her just to see, like, they're testing her at this point. Like, is she going to turn? And then straight away they're questioning her, like, how did Fedra test you? And she kind of explains, I had to count 1 to 10. And like, there's an air of cockiness to like Ellie here at this point, because she kind of knows like, these people need me. And like kind of explains all of the testing. I love the moment as well that she says, I need a pee. And like, Tess throws her a magazine, says, tear a few pages out. That really made me chuckle. And then, yeah, just straight away, the conversation with Tess and Joel. So Joel is all out on this. Like, he's like, no, like absolutely not. And Tess is the one who's trying to convince him, look, you should finish the job. Like, this is the start of Tess, and her realization and her hope is starting to build at this point. She's trying to say, look, yes, we've got a job to do. We should do this. And in her mind, it's kind of that, but what if this is the thing? This is the one thing that can help. And it's really starting to push Joel into that way of thinking. I love as well, like, that's just the start of the Tess arc. And obviously, as conversations go on throughout, that becomes a lot more prominent. Obviously, Ellie comes back in. Again, another note to the flour and the grain situation, where they're having what looks like beef jerky or something like that. And then you look at Ellie, she's obviously having a sandwich. She is immune. She can have the bread. She's absolutely fine. Whereas Joel and Tess are obviously having that dried meat by the look of it. And I just love that, it's a little subtle sign toward she's not infected. She can't, she's immune to this infection.
Absolutely. I felt like you brought up some great points last episode about Joel's willingness to point a gun at a child. And we see that's exactly how this scene opens up. He has his gun pointing
Hmm.
right at her. And then
Yep.
when speaking to Tess, he talks about dropping Ellie off at the QZ and says, better them kill her than us. And
Hmm.
we're still seeing that really shelled off tough side of Joel. He's prepared to kill a child, he's prepared to survive. And Tess doesn't have her gun pointed at Ellie. There's a more open relationship that she's sharing with this moment. And I think that behavior alone touches upon the hope that Tess has and the isolation or the amount of Joel that has been dissociated from former Joel, this person we see in the beginning of episode 1 who's taking care of people. He's still maybe not the most emotionally available person, but he is telling his brother not to smoke. He's being funny and loving with his daughter. And now we see this person who's completely shut off. And Tess, who we learn is from Detroit, which is, a tough city, and would explain maybe why she has such a tough personality and she has been able to survive this apocalypse. She is still more open. She's still more available. And I think it says a lot about how we see Tessa's character unfold in this episode.
Definitely. And like, she is a lot more open. And as things go on, like, she starts to mother Ellie in a certain way. She's like, she says to that line to her later on, listen, like, you need to know this because this is how you're going to survive. And like, as we get to that point later on, but also Tess is in control all the way through. She's the one who's dictating what's going to happen. And even when she shuts Ellie down, when like Ellie's like, oh, you need me to get the battery, so da da da. And she's like, look, I'm going to talk to you like you're an adult. And like again, she says, we're not good people, Joel and I. And like she's just shutting that down, but also controlling the situations. Like, look, we're going to do this. We're going to do it this way. Let's go. And I love that about Tess. She's in control, but also she's like opening herself up to possibilities that this could be the moment. This is the new important thing. And as she says and hints at later on, this is our redemption. And I love that we start to get into that thinking with Tess. Plus, as well, I could just listen to Tess talk all day. As we said last time, she's just an icon. I am here for Anatov always. Yeah, so then obviously we go outside. So then we go out, it's like a really nice sunny day. Like they have a moment of even when Ellie looks up and she's like, oh my God, wow. And even Tess says, yeah, it's different in the daylight, right? But the important reference here is the crater, right? So there's a crater and then, they look at that and then Tess obviously explains saying, oh yeah, like they started bombing the cities and it didn't work everywhere, but it worked here. And that's a really interesting line in terms of like the geography of this outbreak, like how other places are worse than other places. And again, it's foreshadowing to say that, where we saw initially, it was quite controlled by Federer. We had we had all of this control. But what we're going to go into goes out of control, where all of that is out of the window. But I just love that call back to the opening as well, when we had, the doctor saying bomb, and then we get the repercussions of that.
Yeah. I love how they are really tying things together in this show. They are tying not only the beginning of episodes to the end half of episodes, but they're elaborating on themes throughout the episodes that are creating a continuity in exploration of this world. And in this episode, we see a lot about the bombs. And it also is affirmed. I brought up last episode, Sarah quickly says, why were there explosions? And then we see the road shut off. So now episode 2, they explore that a little more. They explain that they were bombing the cities. And we know that this mycologist, maybe she's the first one to give that order, and maybe the Indonesian government started, and then maybe it just happened after that as a potential solution. I really loved the beginning of this. They're walking out into the world for the first time. I like that slow blur to focus because it's the first time we, just like Ellie, are experiencing the outside world. And I thought it was so nice. I also thought it was a little head nod to the fan base of the video game, because you notice as soon as they walk outside, it looks just like the video game. It's gorgeous. It's stunning. And it really shows the state of the world, which we've only been able to see in pieces. At the end of episode 1, we saw it in the really dark of night. And Tess even says, looks different in the daytime, because that's what we are thinking as the viewers. We're thinking it looks different in the daytime. How One thing I wrote down, how is that building standing? That big building that's tilted. How is it still standing? I just don't. It's a very pretty shot, but it makes no logical sense to me. Another
Yeah.
thing I really liked about this moment, because it's similar to the video game to me, when you're playing the game, you can interact with different objects in the same way that, Sarah opens the drawer, takes the switchblade out in episode 1. That is something that we would do in the game, but sometimes you can do that with miscellaneous objects, and they focus on the giraffe stuffed animal beneath the car,
Mm,
which I thought was obviously world building. It's pairing this idea of innocence in this apocalypse, but I think it's also that Easter egg moment for the video game lovers, because we get to interact with those miscellaneous objects. That's part of the world building. It's part of the storytelling of the video game. And there's so many side quests, if you will, of storylines and narratives that we piece together. And some of them we remember and we fall in love with, and some of them are passive and forgotten. And I love that idea being explored with just this one stuffed animal in the middle of the street, this innocence abandoned amongst chaos. I thought it was really poetic.
mm. And a beautiful moment as gamers to reference when a particular giraffe moment happens in the game later on as well. So again, it's a beautiful foreshadowing of that moment, and I am looking forward to that moment happening in the TV show as well, just to see how they capture it. Because in the game, it's such a we talked in episode 1 about moments of when there's stillness and when there's calm and when we actually stop and take a breath in this world. And that is one of those moments. And I'm super excited to see how they're going to do it. So it was a really nice foreshadowing moment to have that giraffe in the middle of the road, knowing what we've got coming up as gamers to see that. But yeah,
Yeah.
like this whole conversation, what they have when they're walking, obviously, and they just say, should we take the long way around, or should we take the, the really dangerous way, the short way? And they're like, well, obviously, let's do the long way. Comes back in later on as well. But then, Tess is, talking to her saying, like, how did you get bit? Like, tell me the story. And she's like, oh, like I was in this mall and I got bit. And even Tess says, like, the mall that's boarded up that you should never, ever go inside of. And she even says, who were you in there? Were you in there by yourself? And Ellie lies and says, yes. Now, this was hinted at obviously in episode 1 when, Marlene mentions her friend and like Ellie kind of goes like into herself. It's that reference again. And Ellie doesn't want to discuss that. And that's fair. But it's just a nice little, again, moment where there's obviously more to Ellie that she's not telling, which is really interesting as a viewer. But obviously as a gamer as well, we kind of know that story as well, which I thought was a really nice little nod to that. Also, we get the mention of when she says, talking about a boyfriend, if you've got parents looking after you, a boyfriend, and like, she says, like, I'm an orphan. And the way she says, and no, and that's a nice little nod towards, like, as Ellie grows up, like in her sexuality, which we obviously explore in the second game as well. And then I love this last part of this conversation, which, Ellie's talking about different types of infected. She's like, oh, there's rumors that there's this type, there's that type. And she describes them and like, one sounds fantastical. Even Tess says like, oh, I hope we don't run into that. And then when she mentioned, she basically describes the clicker, and she's like, "Oh, there's these like blind type," and the way that Tess like kind of falls silent and just stops and looks over her shoulder at Joel just says everything about this type of infected, and it's a nice little foreshadowing moment of it's the Chekhov's gun of we are going to see that type of infected, and the way she looked at Joel means that shit will get real when we see that type of infected.
Absolutely. I also like the reference to bloaters, which will come out later on in the show for sure.
Yeah.
The super infected who explode fungus spores. And the description of the clickers, I think, provides context for both the gaming community as well as viewership. One of the things that makes sense from a fantasy standpoint when you are world building and when you are creating, you kind of create these zygote creatures. You just want to create a hybrid of different things, animals, people, fungus that stir certain feelings and emotions. And when you're playing the game, there is this question as to why do these why do these clickers click?
Yeah.
And obviously they affirm that, saying the bat reference, which maybe alludes to that they see through some supersonic style vision, but in reality they can't see at all, so they just make this clicking sound. But I like the kind of funny rumored descriptions of these infected stages, and how Ellie isn't really informed. She's grown up in this world, but she
Hmm.
doesn't know. And I think that's really interesting. She goes to a school, she's being taught the world, yet so much information is being held from people within the QZ, the younger generation within the QZ, which I found pretty interesting and unusual.
Actually, and obviously that comes back later on when Ellie starts to talk about like, she went to a school and she talks about like how shitty that school was and like, says like, oh, I know where Detroit is. And but yet doesn't know like there's levels of information that they are even keeping from the younger generation, which is really interesting. So then from here, we then go inside of this waterlogged building. I love as well that, Joel and Tess straight into the water walking through and like Ellie's like, I can't swim. Nice little throwback to the game as well. Those fucking annoying points of the game when you'd have to get like a crate as Joel floated over the water. Ellie would jump on, float the water
Yeah.
to make sure she could move. Like, I remember the headache of playing that. So I thought it was a nice little nod to those moments as well. Ellie's messing around. She's like, pressing on the bell and then like moves the trolley. And then obviously the skeleton falls out. And the way that they react, it's that shit, that moment of fucking hell. And it's just that's a skeleton at that point. But still to see something like that is, it's incredibly shocking, but yet they're becoming so desensitized by it as well as time goes on. And as the show goes on and we see more moments of this, it'll become less and less and less. And I just like that we get these moments to start with, but then them becoming desensitized to it will happen more and more.
I loved the entire scene here. I thought it was gorgeous. It reminded me of the opening scene in this episode when we see Ellie in the building, just the kind of imagery, the very world building aesthetic of The Last of Us. Again, similar to last episode, I spoke about the idea of this being a little different from some of the traditional zombie tropes, if you will, in which we kind of see more of the exploration immediately after outbreak. This is 20 years later, so the world is more dilapidated. It's a more covered in greenery. It's been overgrown in different ways than what we would see in other TV series or read in novels or play in video games. So I really like that there is just this fully engulfed world, and we see it here with the flood. I first noted out of any animal in the world that we could see, we see a frog, which I think was really interesting because it's the only other animal that I can remember, like think of offhand, that is significantly used in the concept of metamorphosis, from tadpole to frog, just like caterpillar to butterfly. And I think that was a very intentional choice. I personally loved what Tess said when Ellie asked, have you stayed here before, or something like that?
Yeah.
And Tess says it's a little out of our league, which I thought was really funny, establishing that it was once a very ritzy, expensive hotel. And like you said, I think this was so indicative of the experience we would have as gamers. And I said it in the beginning here, but this was one of those moments where I really felt like we were participating in the game. Even the audio quality, Ellie going off and doing her own thing, engaging with different bits. We experienced that a lot when we're playing as Joel in the first game, how she kind of role plays as certain people and makes it comical, and we see more of her personality. I thought that was really interesting, and I just overall really, really enjoyed this scene. And we also see Ellie expressing fear and alluding to what you said, that she plays it off like she's in the mall by herself. She plays it off like she's tough, but in reality, she's still so green, but to this world, and she just has inexperience. She doesn't fully understand what this world is about, and so something as minimal as the idea of swimming freaks her out. So wait till we get to the scene with the clickers.
Yeah. And as well, like it's these little moments that have, again, lovely callbacks of when, the fear that Ellie has. I mean, not even just in this episode, but like in like, episodes going on as well, that are beyond this as well. And then Ellie overcoming that fear and kind of her dealing with death in certain ways is really, really interesting. And it's these little moments, these are the seeds of when we start to see that, which is, it's so well paced. And then from here, obviously, we then go up the stairs. I love that line from Tess, when Like they're knackered. And then Ellie's like, come on, it wasn't that bad. And she's like, you tried climbing these flight stairs with our fucking knees. I love that line. It was so well played by Anna Torv. Obviously they go through this passage where they look, and then even Tess says, well, that wasn't there before. It's all blocked off. Tess then makes the decision, look, I'll go up and try and find a way through. And I really like this little moment. This is kind of the start of this is Joel and Ellie, and this is the start of them chatting. And whenever we come back to just them two talking, the dynamic is so different, especially when we get to episode 4, when we cover that, the conversations that they have in episode 4 are so different to what they have here, where Joel, again, just sees her as this product that he's delivering. He has no belief in her. He doesn't believe in any of this, very standoff. Like, she's trying to engage conversation. He's like, so, like, where are you from? Like, where is this? Like, tell me about that. And he's like, yeah, I'm from here. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that. And it's just shutting things down. And I love that, this is the start of something. And we will come back to that relationship, obviously, in the future when they build up their relationship together as well.
Yeah, I loved Joel's reference to the knife, because I thought it was just a comical thing that like men will talk about things like that, like nice knife, because he's somebody who knows knives, because established in episode 1, he had one, very similar one. I also love that Ellie is flipping the knife in a kind of impressive manner, even though she's fearful. We see at the end of episode 1 how intrigued she is by death, and she explores that a little more in this conversation, in which she's investigating more about killing and the infected rate, and she has this edge to her, even though she's fearful and she doesn't really know a lot about this world. The ability for her to toss a knife alone, it's almost like she's been preparing for the moment in which she could take on something or protect herself. And then also begins in this episode this motif for a little bit of Ellie wanting a gun. So there's a lot of these spotlights being shown on top of shined spotlights on Ellie, and her desire to I don't know, be violent, or her capacity to be violent, which is definitely something that is explored in the game. So I'm interested to see how that's explored in the show.
Yeah, definitely. And like, there's important moments in this conversation as well. Like when Joel explains to her like the infection rate, when he says, some have been walking around for 20 years. Some have been walking around for longer than that. And we're starting to get the seeds of this world building where we're learning more about different types of creatures that we're going to see. And then I love that line. And like when Ellie says, is it hard knowing they were people once? And Joel doesn't answer that question, because he gets up. Obviously, Tess has kind of come through, like knocking on the door at this point, says, Joel, it's just me, let me through. But that's such a strong point, because everything we've seen Joel go through at this point, but as well, it's a nice foreshadowing moment, knowing that what we're going to get happen to Tess as well. And like the fact that he's got this relationship with somebody that he has to end immediately, and it's a nice little foreshadowing, such an important line, especially for the likes of Joel and what he's been through and what he's going to go through. Again, we transition from here into we see this restaurant. And again, I wanted to highlight this, that we see glasses on tables that are full of like kind of moss. They're just left there. And then, we even see cutlery that's still left on the tables, and like the tables are still made up. This for me it's fantastic. It's like, it's so evident in that imagery of, these places used to be populated, like people used to be here. This used to be like a busy place where people would stay. Like this was home for people. People would eat here. And we look at the opening of the episode where we were in like a cafeteria type restaurant, very populated, people are eating, it's just the norm. And then we come to this where, now that doesn't belong to people anymore. It belongs to like the environment, like everything's overgrown. It's now nature taking ownership of somewhere where people used to dominate. And it's such strong imagery. And I just love that moment of where, they're kind of walking in and they are guests in that space now.
I think I might have been a little preemptive before with the giraffe reference, because from memory, I think this might be where we see it.
Okay.
Maybe we didn't. I just know it was cut to. But if it is at this moment, or regardless, paired with this moment, I think the fact that all the tables are set, paired with what I said before about the giraffe stuffed animal just being left, there's this theme that is brought up in the opening of the episode about the immediacy of the reaction, how it happened so quickly that people were living in these spaces and needed to immediately evacuate. So these tables are set because anyone who was working at this restaurant or eating at this restaurant, they just left. They were in the middle of service and they just left. How quickly this took over, the beginning being September 24th, and then, just shortly after that, the infected is in the States. And we kind of experienced that recently at how quickly something could transmit. And I like how they explored that in the visuals here, even in shots that lasted but a few seconds.
Yeah, it was really, really well done. So then obviously they go outside, they look down at the infected, and this is like, we really do see like a horde here. Like this is like, there's a lot of them. This is like the danger, right? Where they're looking down, so they're high up, they're looking down to the streets. And then, it's the conversation here. We learn about this lore as well, which is actually new for the TV show. This wasn't included in the video game, where, Tess is explaining to Ellie where she says, look, they have connections to each other. Like there's these long type of fibers, which are like wires. They can like, if you step on one of them, it can disturb the infected that are much further away. And, and she even says like, look, this is important. I'm trying to keep you alive. You should listen to this. And that is, Tess is saying that to Ellie, but she's also saying it to us, the viewer, because then we understand how important these moments are when we see like these fibers, these long wires, and how just stepping on something like that could cause a catastrophe later on, which then disturbs them, which brings them towards you. And I just thought that was a really interesting part of, this lore that they've built into that. And obviously that plays off as we see later on when Joel's like hitting one of them and it's dried up. But yeah, just that view of all of them, it's like it's foreshadowing again. That this isn't the last you're going to see of all of them in the street, which obviously that pays off later on.
Yeah, the bodies writhing in the sunlight was such a beautifully eerie image. It didn't feel, first time watching it, I had to rewind it because I didn't know what I was looking at. It was so disguised in the setting, and what a great way to execute this, because that is how the fungus operates. It's so disguised. I like that they moved in unison. I think this was a very smart idea on the writing and directing of the series, how to properly navigate this transition into something separate from the game, in which to explore it a little more for people listening who aren't familiar with the games. In the games, the infection is spread mostly through spores that are airborne, and they would be wearing gas masks for a lot of these scenes. And so this allows that tension to build without the necessity for putting gas masks on, which would kind of ruin the show. A lot of the show is taking place in these spaces in which the infected are present. So, for instance, hypothetically, later in this episode, when they're in the museum, if there were gas masks on that whole time, we would lose so much in the show.
Oh yeah,
I think it was such a great choice, and I love that they did this in such a poetic yet fungal way, because this is how fungus operates. One other note I thought was super interesting was the character exploration of Tess. We see her establishing herself as this tough person. She says, "We are not good people." We feel that in the first episode. Not that they're not good people, but they are survivalists, that they're tough. She has every reason to look at Ellie like she's a resource, like Ellie is but a piece of baggage to be carried, the same way Joel is perceiving Ellie at this moment. Yet Tess is trying to keep her alive. So we're seeing Tess, someone who is tough, who is a survivalist. We're seeing inklings of her believing or having hope, as you brought up in the beginning of this episode, having hope that this might be true. Tess simply wants it to be true. So she is telling Ellie ways that she can survive. Otherwise, why would she care, just so she can carry her to safety? There's something more here. There's a motherly dynamic coming out. Even the way they talk throughout this episode, you see this banter being built. And also similar to what we experienced in episode 1 with Sarah, they are really building up the audience's love for Tess in this episode. They're doing a really great job of us making us like her.
Yeah, and that's obviously makes it so much more tragic when we get to the end of this episode as well. When obviously we have to say goodbye. Ellie is Tessa's hope right now, and she's putting everything into this, and also she's her redemption. And she kind of hints towards that later on. She says, this can be our redemption for all the shit we've done in the past. And it's so evident. And that just builds with the Tess character all the way through this episode, right until the end, with the last kind of few things that she says to Joel, which is so important and set him on a new path as well. It further exemplifies how important Tess is in the role of kind of that Joel takes in this whole story. She sets him on the path. And it's an incredible way to build that up. Now, you mentioned, they decide, well, we're going to have to go now the more dangerous way, which is through the museum. I absolutely love this section. This for me is like chef's kiss. It's so well done. The tension is beautiful. And I mean, just from a point of view as well, like let's say the museum, they go through a museum. Interesting that it's a museum. Museums collect history from like different civilizations, from different people. This is this is a museum of like American history. And then again, it's nice that they're going through that. And yet the whole world around them now is basically a museum. They've gone through that restaurant. It's a museum of a time that has passed. And I really like this metaphor of them going in there. And we've got this world that they used to know as a relic now. And there were worlds before that as well. There was times before that. And I just love that imagery of that being the museum. I thought that was fantastic. But I just love this whole section. Like this for me, it's just the meat of the episode. It's the moment of the episode. It's so beautifully done. Like, yeah, tell me what you think about the museum section, Joey.
Well, firstly, really great point that the world has become a museum. This is maybe a more eloquent way of exploring what I spoke about last time, the setup of the focus of time and how time, when Sarah first gets news, or rather when Sarah first is experiencing that tonal shift where it gets more serious, she's in the clock shop. She is surrounded by watches. She's surrounded by clocks. We have obviously the motif of Joel's watch being broken, him being stuck in time, trauma that he's personally experienced. But we are seeing the world stuck in time. And all these short images, we're seeing the museum-esque picture of the world. And I think it's so beautiful, and it's such a smart place to be. And I want to challenge anyone who's listening to this that doesn't look into these decisions. But when you're a writer, when you're a director, when you're crafting a story, you are not mindlessly choosing the names of characters. You're not mindlessly choosing the colors they wear. You're not mindlessly choosing the buildings that they walk through. All of these details are so important to the larger umbrella that is the themes of the show. And the museum here as the choice out of all the places that you could be in the city, this is the place they walk through. I think it was so well done. I loved it so much. I really enjoyed how they explored the dead fungus. So necessary, because otherwise, if the fungus wasn't dead, then it would have changed their relationship walking through the space. They probably wouldn't have gone in there. And it also demystifies this idea that the clickers, which are infected, that they encounter in this museum, wouldn't trigger a response from all of those infected that they saw earlier on. Because as we see later on, and as Tess explores when she's explaining to Ellie the nature of how this fungus operates, we as the viewer, having just learned that, would think, okay, this makes no sense. These clickers, these infected, should be triggering a response from the horde, but they're not, because of the dead fungus. And I like that they needed to do that, or else it wouldn't have made sense.
Absolutely.
I also enjoy how the body that they find looks. And the, again, tonal shift that happens, even when they're walking on the bridge outside in the beginning of the episode, when they're exploring the different types of infected, when Ellie's describing the bloaters and describing the clickers, and Tess and Joel freeze, they all stop when they hear the clicker sound. There's a clicker that sounds, and they all stop. That level of response, you can't see anything. You're in open space. It's bright out. There's typically, for people who are smugglers, who have explored this world over and over again, they should not be afraid of this. They should know how to work with it. But that sound is so jarring that they set up what's to come here. And actually, at the end of the first episode, when they're walking into the city, there's a clicker on the top of the building on the top left. And I think that's the clicker they're probably hearing, but it's the middle of a storm. You can't really hear it, but you see it at the very, very end of the episode. But it strikes fear in Joel and Tess, who are seasoned professionals. They know exactly what buildings to go into. They know exactly how to navigate the city. They've done this time and time again, yet that sound startles them. And so we go into the museum, and I love the walking up the staircase, the body on the staircase.
Yes.
Can we? Can we?
It's serving.
I was, this imagery, this fungal, overgrown, sporic human hybrid experience. I love it. So it's such an aesthetic that I enjoy, but in my mind, I was like, the amount of work that went into the design of this set, and they're so, quickly moving through the staircase. There's just one shot to this body on the staircase that is overgrown. It's essentially a silhouette. That's that dedication to that small detail. It was so beautiful. And obviously that takes us to upstairs, where the building collapses.
Yep.
Tess and Ellie fly forward, and it triggers a response from what we learned to be the clickers. And I'm so jealous of the people who got to experience this for the first time.
I know.
I watched with my partner, and he's never really played the game. He's only experienced me play the game. So he got to experience it for the first time, and it was really exciting to watch that. And I was just thinking how well they did it, how seamlessly it was executed, and how similar it was to the game, and how it was just so creepy, the suspense building, this kind of horrific, weird, like chicken-like movement. I mean, and how grotesque they are, and the idea of needing to be silent. It was so good. What did you feel about this scene? Because it brought up so many good feelings for me, but like terrible feelings at the same time, because it was so scary.
So I'm in the same position as you, is that my partner's never played a video game. So like, I knew the moment the word clicker was mentioned, or like when Ellie was describing the clicker, I was like, shit is gonna get real. And this for me was like, when Joel even says like, right, from now on, we are not quiet, we are silent, and like, Ellie kind of, stands on the hand of that body on the stairs. Like her face is even comical when she's like, oops. And the way Joel stares at her, it's like, no, we've got to cut that shit out. And then when they're in there and you hear the clickers, and the way that Joel and Tess like turn their flashlights to look, and then you hear another one and Tess turns her flashlight to look, you instantly, whenever you're told, when you're watching something, whether it be TV show, film, like, A Quiet Place did this, when you were told the importance of sound and how you have to be quiet, was the viewer almost shut up as well. It's weird. Like you kind of hold your breath as well in those moments. As soon as you heard that noise, it doesn't matter if you know the context of a clicker or not, danger. And I loved it so much. I love the fact that they all get behind the glass kind of display, and you see the silhouette of like this thing moving behind. It kind of throws back to, again, like the opening when, the doctor's looking through a microscope. She sees it through like, glass as well. It was like a nice little throwback to that. And then
great point.
I loved all of this. This for me is just, as I said earlier, chef's kiss. The moment when Joel has that like kind of mouthed conversation as well, when he's like, look, they're blind, they can't see, but they can hear. And so important. And then just that moment of when it gets really, really close, the flashlight goes up, and then Ellie naturally, it's the smallest kind of whimper of like just a shock, like a startled breath, just that, and then that's all it takes. And then when you hear it scream, and there's the carnage that happens. I love all of this. I love how we've had so much stillness. We've had long shots of them just moving, but this is all close shots. There's a lot of like just movement going on straight away. We see Tess run off. We see Joel fighting something. We see Tess grab like Ellie and pull her around. We then see Tess runs away and Ellie's crawling underneath the table. All of these point of view shots, a lot of it is Ellie and Joel point of view. And I love that. It's kind of reference to the game as well. Like these are the two people we're going to follow. Tess goes off somewhere. We don't know where she's gone. But God, I just love all of this. I love that they're all down as well below, like, exactly like you do in the video game when you get down below cover and then they're moving around. It's exactly the same. The clicker's right there. I love when Joel's like silently emptying his gun and like getting the bullets out, the cartridges, and like with the torch on his side, and it's like slowly starting to put ammo back in. It's so tense and it's so well done. I love this well, like the long shots of when you can see the clicker slowly getting closer to Joel as he's right in frame and like doing something and then shines the light in its face and it's right there. It's just tension. It's just well executed. It's beautifully done. And then that kind of leads on when we have this huge scrappy moment, a big fight. And I love as well when, Joel's shooting one of them. There's another one running towards them. Tess appears with an axe and just slams it into the side of the head. Just this for me, it just highlights how hard they are and how tough they are as an enemy in the game as well. I mean, whenever you hear a clicker, shit, stop. And I like that now we've had this moment in the future in other episodes when we hear that noise in the distance, the viewer and everybody now knows shit will get real when you hear that. You've got to be very careful.
It really reminded me of the first moment I experienced the clickers in the game, which happens at this moment. It's very similar to the game.
Yeah.
And I imagine a lot of people probably wouldn't play the game past that moment because it's really scary.
Yeah.
And eventually you become desensitized, though the sound is so eerie. I recommend anybody who plays this game play it with headphones because when you are swallowed by that sound, it makes the suspense and the horror of the game so much more impactful. I love the subtleties in this scene too. At one moment, Joel throws a statue bust into glass, and that level of relationship that he has with dealing with clickers to kind of disperse sound so he can quickly run away, such a smart move. And it's a subtlety that us as the viewer who don't have relationships with the clickers yet, we won't really pick up on what he's doing, but he's creating sound in the game. You have the choice between engaging with the clickers. You can just go, guns a-blazing if you want and kill them quickly. Or you can do the slow suspense kill where you stealthily get behind them where they can't hear you. And there are a lot of moments when you're trying to distract them where you can pick up a bottle or a brick and throw it to distract the sound. So this is kind of that for me, in which he throws the bust into the glass to kind of create the continuity there. But obviously there's no glass or brick. And it really, I noted specifically as well that gun reloading scene was it was so satisfying to watch that suspense moment unfold. I really enjoyed this part. I thought it was it gave me everything I wanted.
Absolutely. And great point as well about the statue as well, like Joel throwing that into the glass and distracting the clicker. That's directly from the game. As you say, you've got the option to throw bottles or bricks to distract them. Great point there. And then we get the point when obviously the clickers are down, they're all done, they're all kind of catching their breath. And then Ellie has been bitten by one of them. And this is her kind of proof where she can't get infected. She shows the arm and as time goes on, they check again, she's still not infected. In the game, she's kind of walking around the spores, as you mentioned earlier, Joey, where she's got a gas mask off and Joel even says to her in the game, how are you breathing this shit in? Because she's like, look, I can't get infected. TV show, we're not doing gas masks. But it's just a nice visual point. That had to happen for the proof to Joel that she is legit, right? That she can't be infected. She's not just making this up. She can't be infected. This is beautiful. When Ellie says, well, if it was going to happen to anyone, it's going to happen to any one of us. And then the camera cuts very quickly to Tessa's face and her face just kind of drops for a moment. It's that dread of that. I mean, we find out why later on. But just that moment, I mean, Anna Torv, as I've said before, I could fangirl about her until I die. But her acting there, just of her face just dropping just for a second, because she knows. And it's beautifully done. Yeah. And then from here, we then climb out onto the roof. We get the infamous, Ellie walking across the plank, which is exactly the same in the video game. We literally get that shot for shot. It's beautifully done. And then this conversation here where, Ellie's gone across the roof. She's kind of waiting on the other side. And then, Tess and Joel are talking to each other. This is so important. And this is what I'm talking about, the Tess arc. Everything she says here is so important. Where Joel again saying, is this going to work? Like, we should take her back. Like, is this legit? He's questioning everything again. And then Tess says, how about you take the good news? Like maybe once we could actually win. Now that is crucial. One, it's for Joel to hear that, to kind of set his mind into a different framework of thinking, to set him on his journey. But also that's for Tess. That's for Tess and the fact that she knows she's going to die. She knows this is game over for her now. So if she can have a help in creating a vaccine through Ellie, something like that, if she can help getting her to where she needs to be, then that is enough for her to know that, look, I wasn't able to do it. I'm going to die. But if I can just help on this redemption for me, for everything that I've done, the fact that I'm going to die, but if I can just help, then maybe things will get better. And I just love that line.
The line was great, harkens back to the opening of episode 1, in which the doctor is talking about the infection and says, if this happens, we lose.
Yes.
And that setup obviously is coming back. Episode 2, it's going to continuously be, punchline delivered throughout the show, I imagine. Really subtle detail. I wonder if Tessa's ankle is even injured, because she says, let me do it. I just, part of me thinks she's limping because she got bit. We learn in the episode 1 that when you get bit in the neck or the face or upper body, essentially, it's 5 to 15 minutes for the infection to spread. So just in a few minutes, she's going to feel the effects of the infection. However, I think the show is doing such a nice job of taking us back through moments and reliving situations. At the end of episode 1, when Joel is being faced with the mirrored image of protecting Ellie, the same when the soldier's pointing the gun at her, as he was not able to protect Sarah in the first half of the episode. And I brought up how they went beneath the school bus, taking us kind of back through the idea of a school, which we experienced in the first half of the episode. And then it close-ups on Joel's watch. So we know that Joel's watch stopped at that instance when Sarah gets shot. So we know that they're setting up the moment to be Joel experiencing, reliving that moment. Here, similarly, Sarah hurts her ankle in the car crash when the airplane crashes. So he's carrying her because she injures her ankle as well. And that it's kind of this re-traumatizing moment. And I thought that was a nice detail, but I did wonder if Tessa's ankle was even injured or if she's just using it as a guise because she's trying to prolong the time in which she has to tell them that she's been bitten. Another thing I noticed, she says when she is about to go down the stairwell on the side of the building, she says in a very kind of moody attitude, let's get there before it's dark. And she's rushing. And I want to note that on the symptom board that we see in episode 1, we see, which has been explored a lot in the show so far, we see that twitching of the hand, which they tested Ellie with, slurring of the words, and there was one more. I don't know why I'm not remembering it, but the fourth was mood changes, and we're seeing Tessa's mood change, and I'm sure that it's just generally her just mourning her situation and the loss of life that is happening quickly upon her. But we do note that she is acting a little funny, and she acts funny up until the end of this episode. And Joel gives her a look at this moment when she says that, let's get there before it's dark. He looks at her thinking, I imagine thinking, that's out of character. Why is she behaving that way?
And as well, like we get that moment when, Tess climbs down the ladder, Joel and Ellie take that moment just to look out over the city. And like she says, like, quite a view, right? Like, and again, that's lifted straight from the video game. And I love that one moment of when Ellie climbs down the ladder and like Joel has 1 second when he just looks at his watch briefly. And it's just one little look and then climbs down again. It's just time has run out, like time has frozen. This is like game over. But it was just a beautiful little moment of just him looking at his watch again. I just loved that.
And that parallels really well with what I was saying about how right before Ellie is almost shot, which is reliving, paralleling the moment he loses Sarah, the camera does a close-up shot on Joel's watch. And now, right before we're about to lose Tess, and we have the ankle situation, which is paralleling again to Sarah, there's another focus shot on Joel's watch, which really great point. I didn't even connect those two until right now.
Yeah, that's it. It's beautifully played. So then obviously we're on our way now to this, the outpoint, the Firefly one. They're taking Ellie to the Firefly place. And then Tess is walking way ahead of them too. She's like really kind of putting the pace on to get there because she knows now she doesn't have a lot of time left. So she's like walking ahead, kind of looking back at them as if to say, hurry the fuck up because I'm going to die, without saying that. They obviously get to the Firefly camp. There's zero signs of life. They're checking like this truck's empty. There's a trail of blood that trickles into the building. And then they go in and it's like, I love that Tess like grabs Ellie, like marches her in basically. And then they're all dead. And she's like, and it's just that, oh my God. And then, this is different, obviously, from the game and the fact that they were killed by infected. It's actually Fedra who killed them, obviously, in the video game. But then, Tess is manic here. She's looking around for like, one of them's got to have a map. There's got to be supplies around here. There's something, she's going backwards and forwards to all of this. And this whole scene, this whole build up to the last time that we see Tess is really well done. I have to say as well, like it made sense for the infected to have killed them rather than it being Fedra. I mean, the episode itself is called Infected. It kind of makes more sense that what we see happen later on when they're obviously all the infected come in as opposed to Fedra agents. But I love that, Joel's trying to talk to Tessie and he's trying to say, look, like, what's going on? Look, nothing's here. We can just go home. She says, that's not my fucking home. And it's a complete change. And again, it's that mood, it's that shift. And Joel picks up on that straight away. He's like, this is not the Tess that I know. Like, what is actually going on? And then it's that breath, it's that moment. And then when Ellie says she's infected, like, oh, you feel it. You're like, oh my God. And like Joel even is like, no, like, show me. And when she shows him the bite on the neck and says, like, oops, right? Like, again, that's lifted from the game, perfectly done. Ellie removes the bandage. She shows that she's immune. The bite's still there, but she's still immune. So we've got that now. Joel has the realization that Ellie is immune. Tess has been bit. And it's this polarizing moment where he's like, oh my God, this girl I've just met is immune. I'm taking her somewhere. The woman that I have feelings for is going to die. It's just, I love the moment as well when like Tess, she says Joel and takes a step towards him and he flinches back. Like that is, it's beautiful. It's, the moments that you see Joel is scared are really important. Like obviously he was like shitting himself, like fighting the clickers, right? But that's a different type of fear. That's a fear of like death, like his own death. Like we could all die here. But that's scared there. That's that moment of I'm going to lose a woman that means so much to me. My whole life, my whole trajectory, everything here is going to change now that she's going to die. And it's just a beautiful moment played by Pedro Pascal.
Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin spoke about this moment and said that was not scripted, that his step back was actually an instinctual acting response, but such a good one. Oh. And I like what you said, that it's more the fear of losing than the fear of the infection. Although it could be just a mixture of both. But at this point, they have such an intimate relationship with how the infection spreads. But maybe he's scared of her and not worried that she's gonna turn that quickly. Yeah, I thought this scene was great. It was so poetically tragic, and I really enjoyed Joel's kind of confusion that turned into, revelation in a moment. It really explored the idea that in this world, everything happens immediately. And I think that is a motif throughout this episode, in which the infection, in the beginning of the episode, we learn the infection happens right away. Yeah. The doctor says bomb, i.e. don't wait, just do it. I need to go back home to my family, i.e. I don't have a lot of time left. This is going to be quick. Then we see the stuffed animal lost in the street. We see the empty tables leading up to this moment in which we as the viewer want Joel to embrace Tess and say goodbye, I love you, whatever, something, some sense of emotional closure. And he doesn't, he just leaves. And we see it also in episode 1, in which Marlene is bartering with them to take Ellie, how quickly Tess makes that decision. Yeah. She says, I'm bleeding out here, make a decision. And 2 seconds later, Tess says, okay, this is what's going to happen. This world is so immediate. There's no time to think. There's no time for reflection. And whether that is a survival technique because of just how fast things happen, or if it's this dissociating from emotion in which Joel just does not want to experience the loss of Tess. So he is shelling up again. I thought it was so beautifully done. And obviously it takes us to this closing scene in which not Fedra stormed the building, but the infected stormed the building. The fungus tendrils have signaled the horde. And I really enjoyed Tess's breakdown here. One of the best moments of this episode was as soon as they leave this tough burly woman who can take on anything, who's in charge of Joel, essentially, the muscle. She just, in one look, it's all of that fear, desperation, I don't know what to do, almost internalized, closed off panic. She did such a great job of conveying that in one look. And it really made me feel for her in that moment. How did you feel about the lighter scene here? Because like that was the one part of this episode I was just a little like, girl, the flicker of the lighter, like we haven't seen this 1,000 times before. You know what I mean?
I get it. I mean, like, I do want to say before I get to the lighter, like Tess does say that important line to Joel when she says, Joel, save who you can save. That's
yes. Sorry, I skipped
really
over that.
no,
good.
Don't worry about it. That's incredibly important because that line, that essence of that comes back into the very last part of the video game. And I am sure we're going to get that payoff in like the very kind of season finale as well. That's really important. That sets Joel on the path of save who you can save, and he's kind of honoring Tess in that as he goes on through the episodes. I just thought that was really important to highlight. Obviously, she does mention as well, take her to Bill and Frank's, like that's a payoff that we get in the next episode as well.
Absolutely.
But yes, so then obviously, as you said, like Tess is like pouring over like fuel, like, grenades and everything, the infected pour in. Her struggling with the light. I mean, Anatov plays that beautifully. And that look you're talking about, Joey, is fantastic. It's all gone. Everything. The hope that she has in Ellie and everything like that, the moment Joel drags Ellie out of there is gone. And she's just like, I've got one thing to do now, and I've got to die. Now, obviously, the infection's taken over her. So something so easy as lighting a lighter, the way that obviously I read it is, the shaking of the hand when we had the student in the first episode, that shake, that natural shake, that's starting to take over her. Something light in a lighter so easy, this fear in her, the infection's taking over her. Trying to get that lighter to light isn't such an easy thing anymore because she's literally like, her body's dying. Like she's going to die. Now, again, I know it's a motif we've seen a million times in films, like the lighter won't light, and then the last second it lights. I get that. But I think there's a wider context under that, which kind of makes it make more sense. The fact is, this infection is taking over her. We've seen how it references the shakings of hands and how cognitive ability starts to change. So I think in that moment, it's not a corny motif in that it's just happening for the sake of the light is not working. We've got the context that kind of sits under that where we can make more sense of it in our minds. But again, it's, in that last moment, the lighter lights, it's like we've seen it before. But I have to say, and I need to ask you what you think of the tentacle kiss, because that is so divisive with people. And I need to know what your thoughts. So just to set this up, obviously the creature, I think it's like a stalker. A lot of them are running past Tess. And then one of them stops and just turns and looks and then walks towards her slowly. It's really slow paced. There's no kind of harm or urgency in this. And then just kisses her. And we see the tentacles go from its mouth into her mouth.
Well, first of all, Tentacle Kiss. I want a hardcore punk band named Tentacle Kiss.
Yes, please. Give me that album artwork.
Yeah. I thought this was interesting. So my biggest reservation, as I voiced already, was just the lighter situation. I was just kind of like, I totally understood it. I got the handshaking, cognitive abilities lessening, but there was just something about it that I was just like, oh, you couldn't think of anything else. Although I get it, and it makes sense. It fit in, doesn't overcomplicate it. There's just something about it that just felt a little contrived to me. But aside from that, obviously this is happening when this infected is walking up to her and the fungus is merging with her. I thought that this was so poetically brilliant because it adds that level of sci-fi friction in which we realize that there is a suspension of disbelief. It's a TV show. It's a video game. It doesn't have to be so cut and dry. This is exactly what would happen, even though it easily could. I thought the interesting bit was the possible revisitation of the line Sarah says at breakfast about love and dependency and how they're kind of the same thing. And a kiss, which would symbolize love, which would symbolize affection, romance, is being merged with the idea of this fungus spreading, which for the fungus's survival would be its idea of love, if you will. something that necessarily doesn't have the emotional capacity for love, but the way that it would interpret love would be on dependency of spread. And so I thought it was interesting that it happened that way. Obviously, there's a huge focus on the fungus tendrils coming out of the mouth, the doctor, and then the was there another scene which we see the tendrils coming out of the mouth, or is it just when the doctor has the dead body in front of her?
In this episode, it's just that moment.
Okay. So yeah, so we have the kind of tying back to the beginning of the episode in which it's kind of bringing back that idea of the tendrils coming out of the body. I also just love the idea of it's entering her. It's so intrusive, it's so invasive, it's so uncomfortable, but it harkens back to that idea of inhabiting, and that this infection style, it's not eating away at the inside of the body necessarily, but it is inhabiting it. And the same way we see all these buildings inhabited by greenery, the same way that we saw the museum inhabited by the fungus, we are now seeing Tess, unfortunately, becoming inhabited by the fungus. I thought it was great, and I thought it was poetic, and I thought it was really eerie and creepy.
Yeah, it's that. It's weird. It's eerie and creepy, but it's beautiful in that the way it's done. Like as you say, like the moment between them, it's weirdly kind of nice in like in the disturbingness of it all. Like when you watch it happen, you kind of as the viewer, you know what's happening, how it's like, as you said, it's invasive, it's now invading her. You can only imagine what's happening as it's kind of going in like down her throat. But as well, it kind of further emphasizes the point where they were talking about, there's connections with the fungus, right? Like how you stand on something like stand on the wire, as it were, and then others further away can kind of feel that it's building on that connection. So, this is it kind of seeing that she's infected. It's almost welcoming her into the horde. Like, you're one of us now. And it's like, it's that connection that's building between them. And I loved the weirdness of it. I loved it was just dark. I loved Tessa's face when she's kind of realizing what's actually happening. She's like, Jesus Christ, and like, there's no kind of fight or flight from her. She's just accepted her fate. And then that happened. She's kind of like, oh my God, but I'm going to die anyway. And then, yeah, it was just weird, but beautifully played. And again, I actually prefer that it's the infected that come in. I think it makes more sense than it being Fedra agents and like Tess being shot. I think I liked this much more than what happens in the game. And then we get the final shot. So obviously, Joel and Ellie are outside. They're kind of walking away from the building. We get the big explosion. They both stop and turn around and look. It's Tess gone now. We're done. Tess is gone. And I love the moment when Joel keeps walking, he walks out of frame, and we just get that final shot of Ellie standing. And that's like, it's almost saying, this is our last hope. It relies on Ellie now. And then it just cuts to black. And I just love that final frame.
I heard that they had shot a bunch of different endings of this episode, and that this was the one they landed on because of the kind of takeaway and the idea that the audience is left thinking, is Joel going to stick with Ellie, or has he given up on her at this point? Which I thought was an interesting point. I also just thought the explosion was a nice head nod almost to the game, in which explosions are something that we create as gamers with the Molotov cocktails. It is the way to destroy mass quantities of infected. It's the easiest way to do it. So it reminded me of that. I'm not sure that that was the intention, but it did remind me of that.
Yeah.
But I did very much enjoy the ending as well, and it created suspense leading into episode 3.
Yep, absolutely. And then we get the credits. And I just have to say, like, for this episode, for me, this was just, it was beautifully done, like wonderfully done. I think, we go through so many different feelings in this episode. And that's what I think I like about it. Like, we experience different emotions as we're watching it. Like the opening, we kind of see, we're learning a little bit more. We learn how like it's more of a global thing. It's not just an American thing. I love like how bigger the whole thing becomes. It's really, really nice. I like that, we start on this journey as well. We're back to familiar characters that we know, but then we watch the relationships start to change and evolve between Ellie, Joel, and Tess. And then as time goes on, obviously the way that we, the tension that we feel when they're fighting the clickers, we are heightened when we're watching that. And like, we're quiet, but heightened, but want them to survive. And there's so much going on and blah. It's just, that is so well, beautifully done. I love the threat that we feel from the clickers. I think it's beautifully handled. And then just everything from there, the way that we're like almost like stop start. We have moments of pause and then moments of urgency as well. And for me, the highlight of this episode is the way Tess is handled. That arc going from this hardened woman, saying to Ellie, we're not good people. Like, basically, do as we tell you, stop with the attitude, shut the fuck up. To the end where we get her saying, we need to help her. This is our redemption. She is the hope that we have left in this destroyed world. Take her, Joel, take her to the end. And I really, really love that evolution of, that arc that we get with Tessie and then her acceptance at the end as well. And just, it was beautiful, well done, and another fantastic episode. And Joey, what's your final thoughts on this episode?
I mean, I couldn't have summed it up any differently, any better. I think that this was a gorgeous episode. I think there was so much beautiful imagery that was strewn throughout, from opening up with the aerial shot of Ellie in fetal position with that butterfly, moving into the underground space, even with the frog as a subtle hint to something. And there was such a sense of world building in this episode. For the first time, we see the world outside of QZ. And I think they did a really great job to introduce us to this world. I loved the clicker scene. I thought that they handled that beautifully. It was so suspenseful, so well done. Again, I'm super jealous of anyone who's able to experience that for the first time. And Tess is just such a beautiful character in how they explored her on the show. And it made me like her more than in the game, which I thought was such a success.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, beautifully done. So, as we always rate our episodes out of 10, Joey, what would you give this episode?
I don't know. I'm a little trapped. I don't think it deserves any lower than an 8 out of 10 because it was so well done. I don't know if I feel compelled to give it a 9 out of 10 because even though I thought it was subtle and it was successful, there weren't these gobsmacking, awe-inspiring moments in television that I've experienced previously, even though top to bottom I thought it was really good. So I don't like giving 0.5s in these situations. 10, kind of covers that, or else it would be out of 5. So I'm gonna say 8 out of 10, but that's like a soft 8. Like, it easily could be like between 8 and 9 for me.
Yeah, I was kind of in the middle as well. Like, I originally had 8 out of 10 down, and then kind of us talking about it and everything like that, it kind of bumps me up to like, closer to a 9. There's a lot of great stuff in here. It moves the plot along really well. We get kind of direction of where we're going. The beautiful way that they handled the clickers as well was just fantastic. Honestly, just brilliant. And I can't wait to see how they're going to come back in later on as well and how they're going to do that. Obviously, reference to the bloaters and everything like that as well. It gets me excited for more. And that's the strength of this show. Every time I watch an episode, it brings me back and I'm excited for more. And yes, it does so much so well. And I'm just going to miss Tess because what a character. And Anna Torv, as I said a million times, is one of my favorites and I'll miss seeing her. But yeah, just phenomenal work. All right, so that was our coverage of The Last of Us episode 2. And I am super excited to jump into episode 3 with you, Joey, because that for me is an hour of television that is perfection. Like, that episode for me, I can't wait to talk to you about it because I fell in love with the show even more than I thought I could after watching episode 3. So just to get everybody a little bit of a pump and excitement, that's the level I'm going in at for episode 3. All right, so again, just Joey, if you want to let everybody know where they can find you on socials.
Sure. You can find me, my personal socials across all socials at Joey Dean Official. And you can find my band, King Vagabond, at The King Vagabond. And you can also stream our music on Spotify, on YouTube, watch our music videos, or anywhere you can listen to music, you can listen to us.
And there you go. So make sure you go and check out Joey and King Vagabond. If you do want to follow the podcast on socials, we are on everything. So it's just Last Week on Pod. You type that in anywhere, you'll find us. We're also on all streaming platforms. So make sure you go and give us a listen on there as well. If you want to follow me, I am at Straughan87 on all the socials. As I said, type that in, you'll see my face. So thank you again, Joey, for going through this with me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Really enjoying this. I'm loving covering this, The Last of Us. It's perfection. I get excited to do it. And yeah, thank you again, Joey, for doing this with me.
Thank you. This has been fantastic.
All right. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Bye.